The bullman then reached behind the heart chewer, unfastening his arms, and then kneeled, freeing his buckled feet. The heart chewer then seemed to get bigger as he stretched, blood glistening off his sweaty body. "Good Lord!" Edward exclaimed, and my eyes shifted to his thigh, which seemed to be fully mutilated. It was purple at spots. I assumed that's where the boar's hammer hit him, but beneath the blood and purple there showed a huge scar. I gathered this was the same last fight the baker was talking about. At that point in time, I was transfixed by the brilliance of blood in the arena. The contrast it made against the yellow sand, the way it complemented the boar's broad forehead, the way it oozed from his chest wounds, and the way the heart chewer had it all over his body, forming a protective layer on him. I wondered if blood could be armor. Little did I know then that blood could be everything. The very essence of life, and the sap of sustenance, as well as the only thing that was capable of draining the life out of you as it drained from your body. Blood is purification and atonement all rolled into one. It's armor, it's purification, spiritual cleansing, and a precursor to death. Blood is one word that brings together both life and death. The harmony of life and death then transcends any humane experiences one has had. I roam the streets, visit the houses, the alleys, and the pubs, all to douse my yearning for blood. I have sacrificed men, women, and children alike to gain sustenance, to purify myself and the world from the burden it bears. I finally let the blood loose, rendering mankind a huge service in the disguise of death. I let the blood seep out from the cage of human bodies. I set it free and let it, in turn, set me free. The fight. I noticed the boar was more popular because of the virtue of his good looks and agility. The heart chewer was more somber, heavier, so it could not match the speed of the boar. The boar skipped back and forth, all over the arena dodging the axe. The heart chewer picked up his axe once more, and we all, despite the noise, heard a metallic clang as the hammer fell on the axe, knocking the chewer off his balance for a fraction of a second. Father held his breath, and Edward smashed his fist against the chair. The one-on-one fight had even drawn my interest in, and I followed their dance intently. Chewer regained his balance and hurled himself at the boar, who found enough time to aim at the chewer's thigh scar. The chewer dodged artfully, but the edge of the hammer slightly grazed against his skin. Another bruise, I thought. The fighters waltzed back and forth for about an hour. The boar seemed to be a lot more defense-centric, using his speed and agility to dodge each blow the heart chewer aimed at him. The heart chewer was more physically dominating. He towered over the boar, launching offensive after offensive. The fight was so intense that I felt drawn in, focusing on the smallest of infringements and grazes of weapons. The fighters, they both had their individual style of combat that made them look mismatched, like a rhino fighting an elephant. I felt impatient. Timid as I was, I felt an odd sensation in the pit of my stomach, almost akin to excitement, the moment someone's blood dripped onto the arena. Both the fighters were covered in blood, but I was fixated on the fresh blood welling out of their open cuts and lacerations. At first, I thought the strange feeling in my stomach must have been because I ate something strange, but my heart leapt with every graze and dodge. The fighters were circling each other. I shifted my gaze from the peasant women entering our row. Suspended from 2 ropes fastened around her shoulders was a little wooden box with a freshly baked snacks and the likes she was selling to men in exchange for a few coins. She wore a low-cut ruffled top with a broad skirt, and a drunk man reached out to lift it up. She slapped a ladle down on his fingers, and other men guffawed. Then silence, as everyone focused on the heart chewer and the boar circling each other. They both looked vicious. The boar was no more his charming self. He was doused in blood, sweat, and sand. His ringlets lay limp against his forehead as his chest heaved. The heart chewer was visibly exhausted and bloodthirsty. I wondered if he actually chewed people's hearts. I tugged Father's sleeve.
Father, why is he called the heart chewer?
Young one, why do you think? Edward stared at me, then smirked.
Because, Jack, he has quite a record. He brings a man down.
Edward frantically gestured with his hand to explain to me, and he wrung his fingers in a grotesque, claw-like gesture. I could see his yellow chipped nails in his talon-like hand, then shot in my chest.
Rips his heart out and chews it.
He made a show of digging his plaque-infested teeth into an invisible heart. I just gulped. That's right. You'll see, hopefully. I saw the two men sizing each other up, circling each other around in the arena. The crowd went insane. People shouted in anticipation of the game, and the boar took the first move. He lunged forward with all his might, raising his hammer to smash the chewer in his midsection. The chewer growled, slightly startled, and blocked the hammer with his mighty axe just in time. With a twist of his powerful arm, he trapped the anvil of Boar's hammer in the groove of his axe. He quickly tilted his arm this way and that, trying to wrest the hammer out of the boar's fist. The boar held onto his hammer. I noticed the boar sneakily inched closer to the chewer, both his hands on the hammer. He lifted his leg and with a thwack, lodged a kick into the chewer's thigh, who buckled slightly. This little moment was enough for the boar to snatch his hammer away, but the chewer with his overwhelmingly brute frame recovered just enough to block out that blow with his glinting axe.
Good Lord! Exclaimed Edward. That was close.
I noticed I had been digging my fingers into the bench in front of me all along. I almost forgot to breathe. I was so excited I could feel my blood pulse in my temples. I gasped as the chewer took half a second to recover, and with the quickness not anticipated by the boar, hacked at his rival. The boar tried to lift his hammer, but it seemed like the weight of the magnificent weapon became his undoing. He was a second too late. The boar went down with an almost boar-like cry of pain. There was pin-drop silence in the arena. Blood sprayed from in all directions on his slit chest. The axe still lodged in it. The boar writhed in pain at the chewer's feet. I still remembered that sinister smile of victory on the heart chewer's face as he stood over the boar. He shook his arm, dislodging the flesh from the boar's chest, giving way to the rivulets of blood flowing out of the boar's chest. The boar was going to die. That realization sank in, and I heard a woman sob, and someone raised up the bloodied bonnet the boar had tossed our way. A spectator, probably a lady, tossed the bonnet in the pit, and it fell over the boar's face, shielding him from seeing what was to come. I felt a deep rumble in my chest. I was a sickly child no more. Something rushed through me, and I was aflame with passion for some odd reason. Now, I roared with the crowd, raising my fist into the air and repeatedly chanting, "Heart chewer!" with them, until the stadium drowned in our voices. The boar groaned weakly as the bonnet landed. Even the heart chewer raised his eyes to look gratefully at whoever tossed the bonnet. I still like to think of the boar's groan as a note of gratification to the kind lady. You see, I have killed many, ripped them to shreds, but the best of deaths, the most respectful of deaths come unseen. The noblest way to kill a man is to close his eyes first. The most disrespectful way to slay them is to gouge their eyes out after having them witness what is being done to them. In a way, if you close your eyes and you are near death, you are tuning out the gore and the junction of life and death. There is a certain beauty about the people who brazenly accept their fate and admit they would die soon enough. Such submission intrigues me. Such submission is also a quality of most dying men. Let's go back to my arena memory. The boar was in great agony. He rubbed his heels against the hot sand where his blood had fallen. The heart chewer was mannered enough to put him out of his misery soon. That, my father told me in the arena that day, is the sign of a noble warrior. And I kept it in mind when I went out to kill later in life. The only man whose death I prolonged was Richard. I had a good reason to. You would have understood had you known Cousin Richard. I'm just glad nobody would get to know him. Lord, a proud killer like me. Why is it so hard for me to stick to a subject? Richard would come later. For now, we get back to the arena where the heart chewer was quick to put the boar out of his misery. But the way he ended it just changed my entire life. If before I was feeling these brief jolts of passion watching the blood drip, and now it felt like I had swallowed the sundown whole. My body burned, but not in a painful way. I just felt the current jolt through me. I had never felt so alive as I watched. The heart chewer leapt up as the crowd roared, pumping his humongous hands up in the air and twisting his fingers into claws. The people screamed. I roared with my father, as anticipation built up in every fiber of my being. Who would have thought I would get so entirely invested in this fervor? The heart chewer knelt, and I felt a jolt run through me as he dug his bloodied fingers into the slit his axe had ripped out in the boar's chest. With a mighty roar, the heart chewer ripped apart the boar's chest. I shuddered as fire ran through me. Prying his chest apart, the heart chewer dug his claw into the boar's flesh, ripping out his ribs and wrapping his fist around his heart. With a rough jerk, the heart chewer ripped out the boar's heart. The red bag of muscle glistened as the boar stopped moving entirely. There was too much blood. It stained the sand around the boar scarlet. I had a strange urge to spring to my feet and run to the bloodied sand, feeling the reddened grains slip from between my fingers. I held myself back and watched. The heart chewer was going to prove, I imagined, that his name was well earned. He lifted the thick, limp heart up above his head and dug his fingers into it, crushing it with his hands. "Holy Lord," I heard Edward whisper next to me, before he ducked and vomited out on my feet. The vile smell made my nose wrinkle, but I was too engrossed in the scene unfolding in the pit to care. I bit my lip hard, tried biting it harder so I could puncture my skin and taste my blood. The heart chewer squeezed the heart harder, and blood spurted out of it, running down his head in small ribbons. He stuck his tongue out and licked it. The scene would have been comical, but had not been so beautiful. Fresh blood trickled down his cheeks, covering him, forming a little comforting layer over his already bloodied skin. Then the heart chewer lowered the crushed organ and dug his teeth into the muscular compartment. He chewed on the heart and spat it out, tearing out the heart layer by layer. The arena looked so incredibly gory as we all watched him shred the heart into nothing. The strange sensation just returned as I watched the blood drip down the chewer's mouth, coating his skin. He smiled as the bullman returned and declared the victor, but I kept my eyes on the rivulets of blood dripping down his face, staining the sand. Little did I know that I would never get over the sight. The dream. I smelled a metallic tang in the air. Blood, I recognized with a start. My blood seemed to freeze as my veins turned into little slivers of fire. I felt the flood of almost feverish passion engulf my entire being. Blood. I need to go there. I stumbled in the darkness over dried leaves which reminded me of crackling bones and broken ribs. I called out to someone I cannot remember. I followed the smell, trusting my nose to take me wherever the smell came from. My stomach rumbled, and I heard a boar puncture the stillness of the night. I do not want to get caught in a boar stampede, I told myself quietly. I whispered comforting things to myself as I reached out in the darkness, my arms parallel to my body. My fingertips brushing against the thorns and the tree barks that forced me to switch my route. I inhaled deeply. The smell of blood, sweat, and flowery perfume mingled together to form an exotic cocktail in my nostrils. I suddenly realized what the bonnet smelled like. It smelled of Rebecca, the baker's daughter and my playmate. Oh, Rebecca. I just never wanted us to grow up. Rebecca, who bit her lip whenever she saw Cousin Richard now. I took in her scent, and it mixed with the scent of blood that tantalized all my senses. This is how alluring she would be, doused in her blood. It was good to smell her body and blood on me, even if it was in a dream. I finally reached a ridge and dipped my bare toe into the earth to see if I could keep on going straight. The fluid was more viscous than water, and the smell was overwhelming. I was stupid enough to think it was muddy water. Suddenly a branch crackled, and the bonnet just fell off my eyes into the water. I rubbed my eyes, and when my eyes adjusted to the moonlight, I realized it was not water. Blood. The bonnet had fallen into the blood and disappeared. I felt a deep yearning. It was almost like the lake of blood that stretched on in front of me was beckoning to me. It felt like redemption and purification all at once. It felt sacred. I, with shaking hands, unbuttoned my stiff, collared shirt and took off my breeches, letting the moonlight soak my body before the blood could. Slowly I ventured into the pool, letting the blood surround me. I swam to the middle and bathed in blood. The thick liquid coated my every pore. It formed a warm blanket around me, contrasting with the cold night. It formed layers, hitting my legs, thighs, and crotch in small ripples. I decided to dive inside and let the blood engulf me. I wanted to become one with the blood. I wanted my soul purified. I gasped for breathing as the blood thickened around me, waving my hands around trying to break the surface so I could breathe. But the blood rolled over me, ripple on ripple. I opened my mouth and swallowed some of the blood. Then I breathed in the blood and felt my blood mix in. I woke up, licked my bloodied lip, and knew what my spirit wanted. The birth. I had come back from the arena to an insipid evening. Soggy boiled potatoes for the evening meal and inquisitive parents. Nothing though was the same. Nothing would ever be. Everyone sensed it. But I oddly felt restless, like I belonged elsewhere. Feeling fatigued, I retired to the bed early that evening. The dream I awoke from put things into perspective for me. I realized what my calling was and who I was destined to be. I knew we were filthy human beings. I was sickly and pale and half a man, as my drunk father often put it. He was right. I was incomplete, and my spirit needed cleansing. What was a better way to cleanse yourself except with blood, the fluid of life and death, the ultimate indication of the essence of our body? Afterwards, I resumed my routine ventures, but started viewing people around differently. The presence of blood was central to my observations. One evening I sneaked out and followed the town midwife to the hut of the cobbler, where his heavily impregnated wife writhed about in labor pains. I stretched on my tiptoes and watched her as she moaned, and the midwife prepared linen by soaking it in a knot of warm water. I had witnessed blood bringing death. I needed to go see blood as a bringer of life. My toes couldn't hold out much longer, so I leapt and sat on the ledge. One thing I had a knack for was leaping onto ledges, skipping fences, and, with enough practice, I could even jump over the old stone wall fencing the town graveyard. As I stared through the window, candle flame flickered about, casting long shadows on the wall. I waited and waited, watching the midwife go about her business, and dig out her old copy of the Bible, and read it out loud to soothe the cobbler's wife who squirmed about on her bed. With time, though, when it was almost midnight, the cobbler's wife curled into a strange ball. His wife was a young woman from a neighboring village with ruddy cheeks and a beautiful face. She must have been 17, I guessed, and this must be her first child. The girl had a petite frame, but since she was heavily pregnant, she looked strange, curled up on the straw bed like that. Her screams heightened as the time passed by. I hoped Mother would not notice my absence. This was 3 days after the arena, and Father were off drinking at the pub with his mates. I turned my attention towards the young girl in pain that was now almost unconscious. It was time. The midwife spread her legs apart and supported her against the headboard. The cobbler must have been away. I heard from Rebecca and Anne once that the men were not to stay during childbirth. It was a sign of manhood and masculine pride. I did not care for masculine pride. I thought this was like arena battles. A lot of gore was involved. Something in me tingled when I smelled the blood to come in the air. The woman was turning pale and purple, but the midwife continued to encourage her to push, her gnarled fingers between the cobbler's wife's legs. My eyes were zeroed between her legs. I had never seen a woman naked before, and the atomical differences were enough to fascinate me. Oh, what a little young fool I was back then. Then the wife pushed out a purple, mottled little being. Its skin was hideously wrinkled, but it was covered in blood. I smiled, thinking of how pure his spirit must have been. How lucky the baby was to be covered in blood like that. In the glow of the candlelight, the child's bloodied skin glistened, and I licked my lips. It hit me then. That feeling I got in the arena, and when I was dreaming. I wanted blood to layer me all over. The child sputtered, and the wife stopped screaming. I looked at the blood-stained sheets and felt my cheeks flush. I wanted to sniff those sheets, crawl back into that woman's womb, and then rip her inside out, emerging into this world again. Like a sacred, bloodied rebirth after bathing in her blood. I knew I needed to bathe in blood. The child's cry pierced the night, and the weak mother flashed the hideous purple child a dimpled smile as she took him in her arms. The midwife wiped up her blood and the child clean with her linen and picked up the bucket putting it outside the hut before returning to the room. She did not see me, and I took it as an omen. I walked over to the bucket of water in which bloodied linen was soaked. Slowly, I dipped my hand into the pale red water and fished out a blood-spattered piece of white soft linen. It was like lightning jolting through my arm as my muscles are relaxed. I stood there, tracing the piece of soiled clothes with my fingertips, caressing the bloodstain. Then I walked away, leaving the house fence onto the hill where I lived. Overlooking the town under the twinkling night sky, I finally dared to taste someone else's blood. I held the linen up and licked the darkest part of the bloody smudge with the tip of my tongue, feeling the metallic taste flood my palate. This was not enough. I had now seen a man bleed to death while another victorious man stood over him, bathed in his blood, and I had seen a vulnerable newborn slip out of the womb, blood coating its skin as a mother lay pale and bloodless. I had seen blood give life then, and blood snatch away life. This sacred liquid was sustenance, redemption, and punishment all at once. Blood, I realized back then, was an offering from the God we knew so little about. The only way to purify ourselves and become reflections of God was to bathe in blood. I knew I, Jack, would gain power through it. I knew I needed to act quick and find a way to bathe in blood. My life so far had amounted to nothing. Bloodshed gave me its meaning, and I decided to embrace it and all it offered. Soon, I would be the absolute horror, the powerful, complete man, as opposed to a sickly child with a father who shamed him. My dream had shown me the way. I needed to bathe in blood. Human blood. That is what every part of my physical being has ever yearned for without me realizing it. Oh, how stupid I had been not to realize what my spirit wanted, to stay weak for 10 years before knowing how to reach utmost strength. Oh, how I wish I hadn't wasted so much time and done this earlier. That moment, my limbs ached for more, and I felt like collapsing. I trudged to my bedroom so exhausted it felt like as if I'd die in my sleep. My eyes half closed. I stared at the moon, imagining the lake of blood I had seen in my dream 3 nights earlier. I longed for the dream to return. I wanted to find solace, if not in reality, then at least in slumber, but it continued to evade me because of my limitations. It would continue to evade me for the next 5 years or so. A long, painful period I spent repressing my yearnings and working as a charge. I knew I needed to overcome all my weaknesses. I needed to strengthen my cage of a body. It was just a medium through which I could transcend. But it was a filthy medium that needed to be cleansed, soaked, renewed. I needed a physical rebirth, but to attain that I had to build myself physically. I had to sever ties with all those who did not understand. No man or woman was to have the power to serve as a distraction. I shared a civil relationship with my parents, but that was it. I almost religiously started going to the arena afterwards.